Welcome, Michelle. We're so excited to have you here at our third annual WIDS conference at Penn. And to kick this off, I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit more about your career path and background that brought you to CVS Health in your current position.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And look, I am a huge Wharton fan, so I'm so excited to be here, sadly virtually, but really excited to be with you all. My career path started with Wharton as an undergrad and just incredible lessons in business and leadership and just had the opportunity to meet so many people from so many different walks of life that really prompted, sort of that great exploration phase that is college. So really happy to be here and particularly passionate about women in data science and women in technology. So that is very, very near and dear to my heart. After Wharton, I won a scholarship, the Tehran Scholarship, over to Oxford, and so spent a couple of years at Oxford doing PPE. Went to the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant in New York and also in London. And I should mention in between, lived in Africa for a bit and worked on a World Bank and Citibank joint development project. Then I came back. I was at BCG, New York and London, became a White House Fellow and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Labor. Started my own company with some backing from BCG. Travelocity acquired it. I became CEO of Travelocity for a bunch of years, then went to Citigroup as Chief Marketing and Internet Officer, Guild as CEO, and of course CVS Health now as Chief Customer Officer, and just recently named Co-President of Retail. I would say there's a couple of very, very common themes throughout my career. First, I have loved and always signed up for being in the midst of a transformative time, and particularly for me, that's been around digital. I started my career in digital, and that's where I've always loved is digital remade travel, one of the first industries to go digital. That was an incredible experience. Then banking, then retail. And so I've had, an incredible opportunity to kind of raise my hand as different industries were transforming digitally and to help lead that. Second thing I would say is my success, to the extent I've had it, is absolutely based on working with exceptional people. I mean, I've had incredible mentors and role models, leaders, colleagues, teammates, people on my team. And, the thing that motivates me endlessly is just the chance to work with people who are better than me, smarter than me, and, have, great ideas. And so that has been, really fundamentally important to me. And then the last thing I would just say is, I've never shied away from a challenge. And I think when you grow up in the digital space as I have, you just recognize that the world is moving so fast and fortune kind of favors the bold. And so, being able to have courage, take risks, has been a really important part of my career. And they don't always work, by the way. You all are data scientists, so you can do the math better than I, but of course, it never always works, and there are times when you have setbacks and times when you have challenges, but it's been incredible to me to be at the forefront of so many industries as they've changed, as they've become more consumer centric and they've become more digital, and to work with exceptional teams of people along the way.
Well, it's just so impressive how you it's not by chance, I'm sure, that you have placed yourself in some of these digital transformation industries when they were occurring, travel, bank, and in particularly within retail. Just a quick question in terms of what brought you to CVS Health, or what led you to that? Were you looking towards retail, or if you could just share a little bit around that?
I was super happy where I was, but as Karen Lynch, our really extraordinary CEO, Fortune #1, most powerful woman, I'll add. She's amazing, and as she started recruiting me, the opportunity to think about transformation in healthcare, especially given we were just sort of beginning to go through the pandemic and the like, it became really very attractive. I will say, like everything, right? This is family is super important to me. I'm a mom and a wife and have 2 kids, and my immediate family, my brother actually, and my godson and nephew had been, in the case of my brother, going through really, really tough cancer battles. And so I think when Karen called, something really struck a chord, both professionally, as we were thinking about and talking so much about healthcare and the disruption that was happening in healthcare, and how do you create a more equitable, higher access point, consumer-centric healthcare. But secondly, personally, experiencing, front and center with my brother and my godson, you see amazing heroes in the healthcare industry and extraordinary kind of leaps and bounds in what's happening, and the chance to pay that forward a little bit and maybe make it, in the places that it isn't so great, make it work even better for consumers was personally also very motivating.
Well, we're lucky that you are bringing such passion to that transformation at CVS Health. So we look forward to better healthcare delivery because of that. So shifting a bit, I was wondering if you could talk about why data science and digital are critical to the future of transforming the healthcare experience, what you have found in your most recent journey, and what we can look forward to.
Well, it's a great question. And let me start by saying, like financial services, healthcare is obviously very regulated. So it's a really, really important point as you think about data science, and even technology, because it's people's personal health information. And so it's super, super critical that you start all these conversations with a sense of that obligation, that responsibility we have to patients and to consumers. I would say there is no doubt that data science, artificial intelligence, digital technology, and even emerging technologies, Internet of Things, crypto, and the like, have remade entire industries. I saw this first in travel. I mean, I remember growing up, and if we were super, super lucky and, my parents were going to take us on a vacation, we'd go to the travel agent and have a conversation with the travel agent, and she'd be behind some big green screen that none of us could, understand what she was doing. When you think about how digital and data revolutionized travel, it's really apparent, and put the power in the hands of consumers. That's happening in healthcare as well. And it has been accelerated by the pandemic, and what we are so obsessed about at CVS Health is really fundamentally two simple equations. One, how do we make healthcare more consumer centric so that consumers are really in the driver's seat? The industry was designed a little bit for providers and payers, and so how do we put consumers at the center? But the second thing, of course, is how do we lead with digital first health experiences? You see that with our vaccine efforts, right? 60 million people vaccinated, these incredible numbers, starting with a digital experience, starting with that online, schedule your vaccine, flawless digital experience. You go to the store, you get your shot, you come back, you get your QR code, your credentials, the ability to chat with a virtual healthcare professional if you're having, side effects and symptoms. So that interplay between digital and physical accelerated, no doubt. And so really, we fundamentally believe that omni-channel health is the future. Both of those things are strongly underlined by data science and strongly underlined by the power of data to make things more consumer-centered and to enable, more seamless experiences. And that can be, simple things like making sure we nudge you on next best actions, healthier actions based on what we know about your profile. That can be more profound things like how we think about simplifying, the process to submit claims and get paid, or simplifying the way for you to find the right provider for you using, artificial intelligence to help find the right provider for you. So there's so many emerging applications in the field of health that we're really excited about. Go all the way out, and you see this more and more where AI is helping doctors diagnose. So things like melanoma is a great example, right? Or sort of breast cancer. How does artificial intelligence help medical professionals make better decisions on behalf of their patients? So lots of exciting. It's a great field to enter if you're passionate about data science.
Well, and the combination that you spoke about is the interplay between digital and the physical
That's right.
experience, and putting the customer first, and how all the pandemic has accelerated this, especially at CVS Health. Now, just maybe zeroing in on that, maybe you can actually talk about a very specific lesson learned from the pandemic and how you're using those learnings to be more predictive and proactive. I know you've mentioned a couple of things, But I don't know if there's one specific like case that you want to show or showcase that CVS has done in that area.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, when I think about the pandemic and that, every time we think it's over, it's not. But resiliency, agility, and innovation are three words that come to mind for me. And we've had to really accelerate things in an unprecedented way. If you think about it, I mean, none of us walked into 2020 or 2021 thinking we were going to have to try to set up testing capabilities for Americans in 10,000 stores across the country, right? None of us woke up saying we're going to have to figure out how to get shots in the arms of tens of millions of people over the course of 1 year with a digital asset and a physical asset and a digital QR code to enable. I mean, so, those are just small examples. But equally, we didn't walk into 2021 anticipating the tremendous acceleration in virtual health visits, in mental health, just the incredible and unfortunate acceleration in mental health challenges so many Americans face. And, when you can't access, mental health, obviously there's lots of challenges for your family. And so there's so many places where we've had to accelerate our strategy, seamless virtual care visits, connected back to your provider, mental health care visits virtually, connected back to your provider, getting, online vaccines, testing, all the rest, connected back to the physical experience. So there's, I think, a whole variety of examples that have really leaned hard on that idea of resilience, agility, and innovation. And I will just say that, I can't not thank and give tribute to the people on the front line. We can all sit in conferences like this and talk about, the amazing things we all do from, kind of our corporate locations. But, having been through so many of our stores and our distribution centers, much like healthcare workers, you have people on the front lines every single day in really challenging circumstances, doing their absolute best to make sure that, Americans have access to health. And that is it's a really inspiring thing. My very first week on the job was one of the first weeks that we were putting, shots in arms, providing vaccines. And I was in a store, I was a vaccine greeter, and I got to show, as people checked in, I walked them down to where they would be getting their vaccines. Remember, this was, I can't remember if it was 75 and older or 85 and older when it first rolled out, but it was an older population. And a gentleman walked in with a cake, and he was coming for his second shot. So this was literally the first store in the country that was, 3 weeks out from the first shot doing the second shot. It was a pilot store for the country. And so this was the first day of second shots. And he had a cake that he had baked, and he had sawed off the edges of the heart to be the CVS heart. And he asked me if he could give it to his pharmacist because the person who had given him his first shot, because he had not seen his grandchildren in, over a year. And his wife had died a couple years prior. And so his grandchildren, his children and grandchildren were really his life. And he had not been able to see them. And, so it's easy sometimes to think about the statistics and but when you realize the impact and the power that, so many people who are working in CVS Health stores every day have in their community, it's pretty profound.
Wow, that is just, I don't know how to follow up a question with that. That's such a great story. It also shows the depth of all the leadership skills that you have from, the strategy to the execution to being on the front lines, knowing what the employees are doing in the intersection of the employees and the customers. I know people would really like to know if you could share a few key lessons in leadership with our audience, given your profound impact at CVS.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I mean, I have a bunch of them. I'm going to start with one that I think was one I think about a lot, actually. When I was a White House Fellow and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Labor, I was traveling with her, and I will say Secretary Alexis Herman is brilliant, not the most patient person in the world. And, we were all there. I was nervous ball of energy. I mean, I was like, in my 20s, I'm stabbed the Secretary of Labor, and everything was fine. The advance team leaves the airport. Obviously, there's others on the ground and where we're going. And right as we're boarding, they announce a flight delay of an hour. And I was like, what does one do with the Secretary of Labor for an hour? And I suggested we get coffee. That took like 2 minutes and 42 seconds. I suggested that she needed new sunglasses because she had mentioned that. That took us like 4 minutes and 43 seconds. But we still had all this time. And I asked her a question. I said, you're such a historian. What makes for great cabinet secretaries versus good? I mean, so many people could name a great senator, congressman, president, Supreme Court justice, but I think very few people could name great cabinet secretaries. So tell me, what would you say about leadership? It was one of the most profound half-hour discussions on leadership I've ever had the privilege of hearing, and I'll be endlessly grateful to her. But the thing that really stuck with me is she said, in all of our jobs, and this is really about charting a bold agenda, she said, you get more and more senior, and it's so hard just to keep the pots and all the boiling lids of water. And I knew exactly what she was talking about because we started every single morning at 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m. with the crisis from the day before. 10 of us in the room, her deputy secretaries, myself, a few others, unemployment insurance is down in this thing, state senators doing this, president wants to announce that, so every morning started with the crisis management. And she said it's very hard to do that effectively. But she said that's not really leadership. Leadership ultimately is also being able to chart a bold agenda. And she gave the example of Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor, of course, during FDR, and the extraordinary things she did for the country on all sorts of safety nets that we take for granted now. Social safety nets were pioneered by Frances Perkins, obviously with the support of FDR. And that's always struck with me because I think, as a leader, there are so many things that cross your plate every single day. Today's a good example of that for me, actually. And, the job is hard just to make sure that nothing becomes kind of a crisis. But you have to have the people around you and the capacity to think and to really think about what makes a difference. I often review my calendar. I do retrospectives. I'm agile through and through, which would be my second lesson in leadership, right? Is really embracing agile as a discipline. But I do retrospectives and I'm constantly looking at my calendar and my time and thinking, how would I, given these are my 4 or 5 priorities at work, in my home life, with my husband, in the boards I serve on, in the community, am I using my time the right way? And I'm constantly thinking, iterating on how I use my time better and how I use my team's time better. So I have that capacity to be focused on the things that really move their needle, that really make a difference. Another one I would just throw out there that, 2 more maybe I'll just put in there. Being obsessively, for me, consumer-centric, you have to have a brand, as a leader, and you need to know what you are uniquely good at. For me, that's being consumer-centric. And so that's what's given me the room. That and sort of digital has given me the room to change industries and the courage, frankly, to change industries, to know that I have a lot to learn, but, to be sort of consumer-centered through and through. And I've, at least for me, always passionately believed that anchoring that North Star for me is the consumer. And, with that North Star, it enables me to cut through things quickly, to make decisions fast, to really have a sense of, it's not to say that other constituents aren't really important, but for me, the North Star has always been the consumer experience and how we innovate to drive, better and better consumer experiences and how we use technology. So I think that's become synonymous a little bit with my brand. And that's, I think, a powerful thing is from a leadership perspective, to know what it is that is really uniquely you, uniquely powerful about, your style of leadership. It also gives your team great consistency. Your team kind of knows what to expect and where to focus as well. But the last one I would just say is grit and grace. And I love those 2 words. As a matter of fact, my daughter's middle name is Grace. And I have a habit of writing my kids letters, and they go in a box, and they'll each get their box when they go off to college. So they'll probably be like, "Oh, Mom, you're so embarrassing." But hopefully by the time they go off to college, they'll miss me at least a little bit and, view these letters with great fondness. But I write to them about things that matter. And my first letter to my daughter was about why her middle name was Grace. And, when I was running Site 59, a travel site before Travelocity, we were located at Ground Zero and 2 blocks off Ground Zero. And of course, that morning, we don't need to go into all the details, but our business also stopped. Like nobody was buying incremental last minute travel after 9/11. So you can only imagine, the challenge of kind of trying to take care of the team, trying to rebuild the business, trying to solve our customers who are stranded in so many places. We lost our office. I mean, there's so much that transpired in those weeks and months. But for me, like every day, and it was the oddest thing, Mary, I heard the words grit and grace in my head, and the tenacity and the boldness and the audacity to say this is not the way the story ends, that we believed in something, we had conviction and passion and tenacity, but equally grace, that we had humanity and humility as well. That, that we had to be agile learners, we had to take care of each other, we had to we had to listen with empathy. We had to course correct, without arrogance when we were wrong. So those words, grit and grace, have always been really important to me as a leader. I think you have to have both to be, I believe you have to have both to be really good at leadership.
Well, that was really excellent, being able to share such a well-rounded list of leadership traits that are very important to you. Just to summarize those, I heard you say agility, being able to be agile and also retrospective, being able to be thoughtful and look back. And then consumer-centric, which is always my background is in retail, so I always am, consumer first, and that can apply to the patient first. That can be the employee first. I mean, it's all these, putting those people first on your front line, and then how you execute all this. You can see this through how you're, talking to our audience today is through that passion of grace and grit and tenacity to get through these things and lead your team. So thank you for sharing all those traits with our audience. I think we have time for about 2 more questions. So the first one I want to ask you is, what are the opportunities you see currently for data science and AI that address these health equity issues you've talked about that are so prevalent across the country, and to try to have better access for people? And if you could just talk about that.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of troubling statistics out there when it comes to health equity. I was reading, I think it was just, I don't even know if it was yesterday morning, the morning before, but, on one hand, you see amazing new stats from American Cancer, I think it was American Cancer Society, where mortality rates are falling. Mm-hmm. And it's super encouraging because, preventative care, new treatments, new capabilities, recognizing things. I mean, this is even where some AI is coming in, right? Being able to recognize things much earlier in the process, IoT devices that people are wearing that, alert people to issues, et cetera. So lots of innovation. But the back part of that article is still how much, inequity exists. I think the incidence, some of the stats I was reading, I'm not going to remember the stats correctly, but Black women in particular, lower incidence of cancer, way higher, of breast cancer, way higher mortality. So you see this over and over. You see this in mortality with women who are, pregnant as well, and after giving birth. Just big disparities based on the color of your skin, which should never be the case in a country as great as ours. And so it is still unequivocally the case that your life expectancy is more designed by your, more determined by your zip code than it is your genetic code. And that should never, that's what we all have to work for. Really, that's what we all have to work for. And when I think about, people who are, sort of devoting their careers to data science and technology, you are the makers of the future. I mean, you are the people who will change the future. You will write the code of the future. And I mean that figuratively, but I also mean that literally. And, it is your decisions and your passion and where you choose to spend that passion. And frankly, your ethics, your curiosity and your thoughtfulness about, are we coding things that, frankly, keep the past or the mistakes of the past kind of front and center? Are algorithms fair? Are they unbiased? Are they learning? I mean, all of these really profound, important ethics questions come to the forefront. So I think the future is yours to write. This country needs you to write one that is more equitable, more accessible, for all, more, and you can't imagine a more important time for the fabric of our country than, the one we're in right now. And so my great hope for all of you is that you choose professions with purpose, and that you approach your profession, whatever it is, with a really strong ethical core and a strong sense of the responsibility that lies in your hands as sort of coders of the future, as makers of the future, as people who, use data to create the future.
Wow, that is just so inspiring, Michelle. I really appreciate it. I loved how you framed that up. I haven't heard that. You are the coders of the future, and also really appreciate it tonight. Very uplifting to hear that patriotic tone and an element of hope, especially since we've had these 2 years of just struggling, and what I'm most excited is that what you've mentioned too is that digitization can be that great equalizer when we use talent to help us code and help that digitization to equalize.
Yeah,
across.
and let me give you just a very quick example of that. When you look at the country, 33 1/3 of the country is Black and Hispanic and Native American, right? Obviously, the vast majority is Black and Hispanic. When you look at the number of vaccines given, it is to Black and Hispanic population in this country, it's less than that. When we give our data, CVS Health, we're at almost 40% of the vaccines we have given out are to Black and Hispanic populations. Why is that? Because we fundamentally started this process saying we had to get vaccines into the people, into communities that needed access. And we had to partner with the right people to make sure that we were present. And we knew that for reasons like Tuskegee and others, there's skepticism, rightful skepticism. And so it was a lot of actually our data scientists who came to the table and helped us build what stores do we put vaccines in? Where should we move mobile vans? Where should we move supply? How do we think about this differently than we would think about this otherwise? Because at first, remember, supply was constrained. And we were incredibly thoughtful about that with the help of our incredible data scientists to say, we have an objective here to make sure vaccine rollout is equitable and that it provides more access to those who might not otherwise have access. And look at the results. So I think to your point, it's not theoretical. It is very, very practical.
Well, thank you for ending this short interview that we've had with you on such a great case study that CVS has done. Now we'll be taking questions from the audience.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, great to see you.
Nice to see you. And I know you've had a very busy morning with the earnings call, so we really appreciate you being here. And everyone, for those of you who have joined us, we're going to keep that conversation going. And we've opened up the chat for questions to Michelle. And I see several of them come through. And so the first one we're going to start with is, Michelle, you talked about the leadership qualities that were uniquely yours. But I was wondering if you could potentially talk about how young people can start to develop their identity and find their strengths towards their own leadership style.
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, please chime in with questions. It'll be much more fun if we make this fast and interactive. So great to be here. I think I got advice once, and it was such good advice. I was working at the Boston Consulting Group, and I was working with a lot of people like myself, right out of Wharton. Everyone, we were all analytical. We were all kind of determined. And a manager pulled me aside one day, and he said, Michelle, you're not going to be here in a few years. And I was like traumatized, right? Like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, I thought I was doing so well. And he said, it's not, he said, I just think you're going to be I think you're going to want to, be an operator. I think I could just feel it, and you're doing great. So I hope you stay. But he said, I want to tell you something. If that's going to be your path, you have a toolkit. And right now you have a couple of styles, a couple of leadership tools in that toolkit. And they work really well in this environment because everyone's just like you. Everyone comes from Ivy League. Everyone's, really working hard, everyone's motivated, everyone's type A, everyone's analytical. But if you go run a company someday, and he said, I think you will, you go run a company someday and you're going to have people who are going to need very different leadership styles. You're going to be in situations that are really diverse. And it was such great advice because, he pushed me to test some things about my style at a young age. He pushed me to push on the boundaries of, being sort of really delving into people and understanding, people really being tough-minded in certain circumstances. But like he just pushed me to push on the bounds and to test, honestly, to test different styles, to test what made different situations effective. And I think it was wonderful advice for me at a young age. And of course, we all have our natural style and we get to know our natural style over time. But what I loved about what he said was, look, people who are on your sales team might be motivated by very different things than people who are on your creative team or who are in your call centers, or when you're sitting across the investor, or when you're sort of pitching to the media. So that was great advice. So I would echo that.
Well, pushing those different leadership styles and testing yourself against that. Yeah, that again, you are able to really capture such good advice. I appreciate that. And I'm going to pivot just a little bit from leadership to mentorship. And so in your opinion, what role does mentorship as well as technology play in creating a more inclusive workforce? So mentorship and technology, how is that influencing to bring us towards that inclusive workforce?
So, it's funny because I'm starting to get annoyed with the concept. And so I'm going to ask for forgiveness here in my answer. But I think we've spent a couple decades looking at women and saying, like, let's get you a great mentor. Let's have you join this women's club. Let's have you, get a coach. Let's have you read a great book, and we put a lot of pressure on the person who isn't like everybody else. And I think that's true of all forms of diversity. And over the past 5 years, I've just really hit my limit on that idea. Of course, we all need mentors. Of course, we all need sponsors. But I really believe the onus has to be on the people who haven't been in the room to, make space to change recruiting practices, hiring practices, retention practices, to hold themselves accountable, to measure results. If we believe diversity and inclusion creates better business results, and there are countless studies on this topic, then it has to become a business imperative and a priority, and it has to be on the backs of the people who are in the positions of privilege. And, disproportionately, that is not women. And so I think mentorship, look, I have found mentors my entire career. I have had advisors and counselors and mentors. I see mentorship when I walk into a room of, our most junior talent. Matter of fact, I was literally just in a distribution center earlier today, right after our earnings call. And this woman on our colleague on the floor in our DC said, we were chatting and we both have kids. And she said, I start my son's day every day when he comes home from school at the dinner table. I ask him, who did you make smile? Who made you smile? And I just thought it was so beautiful, and I thought, like, gosh, that's mentorship for me, right? That's mentorship, me hearing some great advice that I can think about in my own life. And she was talking about creating a core of resilience in her child and a core of optimism. So I guess I just think, yes, mentorship, of course, that's important, but I would love for us to each walk into every room and say, who's not in this room that should be? And how do we amplify the voices of those that, maybe haven't had historically the voice? I think that's the way we change, far more than putting on the backs of people who haven't had, who haven't been the majority, putting on the backs of them more work.
So as leaders, it's our role to continue to challenge one another to provide that more inclusive workforce. And I suspect identify if people don't have mentors, encourage them to have that. But it's not just about mentorship, it's about the leaders, really trying to make it that more inclusive workforce.
You have the decision. You have to make a decision on this topic. It is now a bright line. Is this a business priority or is it not? If it is a business priority, treat it like everything else. Put the outcomes that you want to achieve, make it transparent, put the stuff in place, look at the data, analyze the data, where do you have a problem, and put the policies and practices in place that are going to make the difference, and reward yourselves and your teams when you improve. My good friend Melody Hobson, who's a rock star, she has said this to me before, and I love it. She's like, this cannot be the only place you get a gold star for trying. This cannot be the one place where we're like, you tried hard. If we know you didn't hit any results, but you tried. I really do feel like we're at this point in time where this is a bright line, and as leaders, we have to make a very conscious decision. If we believe more diverse, better business results, and there is countless evidence, then it has to be treated like a business priority. And maybe mentorship is an element of that, sure. Mm-hmm. But the bigger issue is, are we committed or not?
As a team, as a company, making it, like you said, making it a business priority to draw in line. Okay, so we're going to pivot. Thank you very much for that passion and grit and grace that you provide with that answer. This one is a very simple question, and it relates to everything we've talked about. But can women have it all? Family.
Yeah, I saw that question in chat. That is a tough question.
Leadership. I mean, you're evidence of that, but maybe speak to that a little bit.
Well, first of all, I think it's actually a really good and very hard question, though, too. It depends on your definition. And I think this is really important, because I think so many times, we all try to present this like everything's great face to the world. We've got it all under control and it's all working and it's all terrific. And that's just not the case. Another good friend of mine, Deshunda Brown Duckett, she and I were doing a fireside chat recently. And she said, it's really important to check on the ones who always seem okay, how they're doing. And I think the pandemic laid a lot of this bare for women, that it is hard to try to balance a home and kids and a husband and community and work and maybe you're also caring for other members of your family. So I don't want to wash over that. I want to be very clear that, I feel like I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of success in my professional life, and I feel really lucky to have a great, family life as well. But there have been plenty of times when it has felt really hard. And so I think for me, the things that I hold dear is, one, making sure I'm always really clear what my priorities are, and so I can't do everything with my kids. I can't be there for every moment. But there are things that I am always there for. I will always be at the parent-teacher conferences. I will always be at their big recitals or big events at school. I will always be at their doctor, their annual physicals. I will I will prioritize as many of their sporting games as I possibly can. So there's certain things, like I'll always be at the dinner table, if I'm not traveling, and I try to minimize travel. So I try to make sure I'm clear in my mind about the things that are priorities for me and my family. And by the way, I adjust that all the time because they shift. Maybe one child is having struggles with school or with social or with sports. Maybe work is really heated up in a particular area that I feel like I've got to spend more time on. But what I don't want is to do that thing that I told you Alexis Herman warned me about. Just try to do everything and try to make everything not erupt. I want to be really purposeful and intentional about the things that I think matter most in my life and in my family's life and in my work life. And so I think if you do that and you take a long view, I think you can absolutely have it all. But that doesn't come without tough days, tough weeks, tough months, and if you're audacious and you're bold, you're going to have those, you're going to fail, you're going to, let yourself down. So I guess I really try to keep perspective and have a long view.
I like that, having that long view perspective, and then forgive yourself, knowing that you will potentially fail and there will be those hard days. Knowing that that's there, you don't know when it's going to come, but admit that it's going to know that it's going to be there. Another good question that came in is, how do you envision data science and AI continuing to transform the business landscape, and maybe specifically within healthcare, healthcare retail delivery, which is really the sweet spot for CVS?
Yeah. Well, I think healthcare has been behind. Healthcare has been behind both from a consumer centricity point of view and probably from a use of digital and technology, but that is rapidly changing. And so if you see, even simple things like telehealth was not something any of us thought was, really when it was on the periphery, right? It was less than 2% of all medical visits were telehealth visits. That changed over the pandemic. And while you cannot, there's plenty of things you should be in person for when you're thinking about healthcare. There's some stuff that telehealth could be an advantage. Think about mental health and mental well-being. We have a crisis in this country in behavioral health. And, for so many, the ability to get the help they need feels very far off. It feels far off because there's challenging to get to locations. It feels far off because there's stigma attached, and it may feel far off because of other reasons of access. If you can democratize mental health and sort of behavioral care by allowing digital tools so that you can talk to therapists, counselors, practitioners, from the comfort of your own home, from a place that feels safe and secure for you. Maybe not every time, but isn't that a huge step forward for people struggling with behavioral health? And so, and by the way, the numbers are astounding in terms of how many people in this country are struggling with mental health right now. So I think there are so many places that digital can help remake the experience, simplify it, make it more convenient, ensure, access, health equity access. And so those are the places that I'm really passionate about pushing at CVS Health.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. And there's so many up in the chat, but I'm just going to take this one, which is, it's a common trend in many STEM fields that many underrepresented populations, they can't even apply, or they don't apply, they don't know how to apply. Which, in data science, women are underrepresented, and we're really happy that you came to speak at this conference. So what do you think are strategies we might be able to take to continue to foster interest in data science in the future? And if you want, you could just even, maybe take the case example at CVS. What is CVS doing internally and externally to foster those strategies to have more inclusion in data science and encouraging specifically women that are underrepresented to go into that field?
Well, I would say there's two thoughts here. First of all, the data and AI can actually help us take bias out of recruiting. That's a really important point, because I'm going to come to the point about people not even applying in the first place. But we write job descriptions that, have a lot of terminology and a lot of things that put off underrepresented populations and women. We know that is a fact. And so there's lots of great examples of using AI to take bias out of recruiting. There's lots of great examples of thinking about hiring practices that are more equitable and fair and produce sort of better results from candidates. And by the way, the future is going to really depend on this, because when you look at so many companies now are using AI to screen applicants. So if we're not careful about that, the bias of the past gets, sort of coded into the future. And so if it looks like young white men with hoodies make up the best technologists, because today in your technology department you have, 80%, then the sort of algorithms are going to look for those people, right? So this is a really important topic. This is a really important discussion in terms of how do we actually bring candidates in and screen them. But the second thing I would just say that I think is also incredibly critical is, we have to change as a country to be thinking about skills over degrees. And I know that's not something this group of people have to worry about with all of us have prestigious Wharton marks. But when you look at so many entry jobs in data science and in technology, we are screening out people who are well qualified. And that will be a colossal failure for this country if we create haves and have-nots based on familiarity with technology and ability to apply for the next generation of jobs. And I'll give you a great example. Cybersecurity is a great example, because the vast majority of cybersecurity jobs now don't require advanced degrees. Remember, they might not even require a college degree. And yet and there's tens of thousands of cybersecurity jobs open in this country at any given point in time. Go look at the job descriptions. They all say, oh, we want 4 years of college, we want X masters, we want all this experience. That is not the lived reality of what it takes to be an entrant into cybersecurity. So we've got to figure out how to prioritize skills and experiences over degrees. My old company, IBM, did a lot of great work in this area, and it's something I'm really passionate about, because there are plenty of populations, that could be extraordinary in your chosen fields of data science, AI, and like in other technology fields, that we have got to make sure the aperture is open for those individuals as well, because we won't like the results as a country if we don't do that.
Yeah, well, that was just a sensational way to wrap up our keynote Q&A. Thank you so very much. Can we all thank CVS Health's Michelle Peluso for joining us today? It has just been such an honor to have this conversation with you, Michelle, and I want to thank you for all those insightful answers to our audience's questions. So have a great rest of the day.